a great introduction, right? That was good. Thank you, Rents. All right. So, what if you wanted to read this book, but decided to start right here, in the middle? You begin reading, and you're quickly immersed in the story, although you're not really sure how it came to be. The characters seem interesting enough, and the dialogue's entertaining, but there are holes in the plot, and you're not really sure how the characters fit together, who they are, or where they're from. But you continue reading anyway, not realizing that all you would have to do to truly appreciate and understand the story would be to start at the beginning. Essentially, this is what each of us has done in terms of where we live. We've all just arrived in the middle of the story, most often without any idea about its beginnings. If only we would look back to the beginning chapters of the cities and towns that we live in, we would see the key characters, the struggles, the hopes, the dreams, and the legacies that started it all. Where we live and the story of where we live is a part of each of us, because wherever we're from, we have this one thing in common. Our lives are centered around this place that we call home. This is how I felt about Holly Springs, North Carolina. As a Seattle native, I became like thousands of other people who moved to Holly Springs, a transplant who felt drawn to the little town. And to be honest, I noticed quickly that most of the people in town were actually from somewhere else. We had all just stumbled upon the middle of this story, driving past old storefronts and old houses on our morning commutes, or living on streets with names that we'd never even heard of. We were all just plugging along in the middle of the story without any clue to the town's beginnings. I noticed that the only thing that really brought all of us together was the fact that the majority of us were from someplace else. And I wondered if the small percentage of people who were actually from Holly Springs might look at us as strangers and at times invaders. And so I resolved that it was time to uncover the roots of Holly Springs and expose them for everyone else, natives and transplants alike. With a degree in sociology, I knew that sharing history, local history, could transform my community. And with a degree in theater and a background as a playwright, a director, and actress, I knew that the perfect place to do it would be the stage. And so after a few years of research and meeting with the town historian, interviewing residents, and writing like crazy, the play, Finding Patience, the Story of Holly Springs, was born. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Finding Patience tells the story of Holly Springs from the Civil War to the present day. At the center of the play is Patience, an African-American freed slave who shares the stories of the last 175 years of Holly Springs. She also happens to be dead in this play. She watches over the town. She tells the stories and shares their sorrows and heralds their hopes, revealing what every person wants most in this life, to be remembered. The production, which took place last June, included a diverse cast of over 80 people. You can see all those people in that picture. Some of them might even be here today, so welcome. And a large, amazing crew, original music, and 11 performances. Before we knew it, Finding Patience became, quite literally, the talk of the town. And people wanted to come and see it. And it wasn't long until all 11 performances were sold out. People were drawn to the project, and audience members were compelled to buy tickets simply because no matter where we're from, what we look like, what we do for a living, or our socioeconomic status, we all have this one thing in common, and that is where we live. According to Dr. Catherine Laughlin, she's a globally recognized expert in the field of placemaking, feelings of belonging actually make the difference between merely surviving and thriving in life. She cites a groundbreaking study from 2010, which says that 40% of all people feel no attachment to where they live. 40%. And what she found is that when people do feel an attachment to where they live, the entire community benefits, both socially, emotionally, and financially. Our experience with Finding Patience verified these findings, and the benefits that we found from it, from local history theater, far exceeded our expectations. And we are continually seeing those things today. So my passion for a local history theater movement officially started with that. A call for every town, every city, every state to tell their stories, to tell their history on local stages with local talent. So why local history? Histories are not a new concept, as we know. In ancient Greece, the oldest play, written in 400 BC, is considered a history. And then Tudor England brought back the histories in the 1500s. And of course, as we all know this guy, William Shakespeare, his histories are some of the most enduring plays in English literature. And then, in 2015, thanks to Lin-Manuel Miranda, we have an amazing historically based play called Hamilton that has been a tremendous success on Broadway. So it's clear that interest in history plays is as high as it's ever been. But local history actually adds a different element. It's more personal. Local history allows us to look at big historical events like the Civil War or the Depression through the lens of our communities. It allows us to look in the past and see where we got things right and when we got things wrong. If we would like to right the wrongs of history, we must first try to understand what they were. Some of you might recognize these drawings, these sketches of some pieces of Duke's campus. If you're here every day, then this picture is very familiar to you, I'm sure. Now, what if I were to tell you that the man who drew these was fluent in French? He was an immaculate dresser who wore fancy suits everywhere he went, including to the beach. Now, that probably wouldn't surprise you very much, but what if I were to tell you that this same man was not even allowed to set foot on the campus that he helped design? And that few even knew that he designed it until the 1980s. As some of you know, Julian Abel was a black architect who designed a lot of Duke. And due to Jim Crow laws, his designs were created in anonymity. Had a descendant of his not come forward in the 1980s and told us about this injustice, we never would have known. We cannot write history until we know history. Now that we know Julian Abel's accomplishments, we can celebrate them. And we can resolve to never, ever repeat the history that kept him in the shadows. Due to today's racial and political climate, local history theater provides an opportunity where we can discuss the pains of the past in a way that increases awareness, empathy, and understanding, that allows us to come together and decide that we're going to do better in the future. This is a house that has been an eyesore in my community for a long time. It is practically growing into the forest. And it's a piece of junk, honestly. Doesn't seem to be worth very much, does it? But what if I were to tell you that this was the home of Mary Ann Holland, a widow who had 6 children, the youngest being just a toddler when her husband went missing during the Civil War. And that on that little front porch there, in the spring of 1865, Union soldiers came with a wounded soldier in their hand through Holly Springs, and they knocked on her door. They needed emergency help. Instead of barricading her door closed, she opened it. Mary Ann tended to the soldier's wounds and helped nurse him back to health. She moved her whole family into the upper floor of this house, and then she made a field hospital after the main floor. She nursed the sick, she made peace for the dead. And she even went so far as when Confederate troops finally surrendered and the war was over, she kept a soldier on at her house and helped him until he was thoroughly healed, and then she sent him back on a train months later. Mary Ann had her enemies in her house. These are the same people that are on the same side as those who killed her husband. But Mary Ann exemplified the spirit of Holly Springs when she looked past the differences, and instead of seeing Yankees, she saw human beings. Now that you know the story of this house, does it change its value? What do you think? Yes? Yes. When we understand something's history, it means more to us. Is it still the same house? Is it a piece of junk? Well, it's the same house, but when we understand where something's been, it means more and it increases its value. The same is true of our cities and our towns. When we understand their history, they mean more to us. We are willing to take better care of them, and we have a desire to leave our own legacies in the town. Now, how much more would Julie and Abel or Marianne Holland's stories mean if instead of just hearing about them or reading about them, you could see them on stage? How much more would that connect you to these stories and to your communities? Here are some pictures from Finding Patience of Marianne and her children. And this is some soldiers who came, and the wounded soldier, as you could see, a young soldier. The audiences were so touched by this that it created an excitement about preserving this house, because Marianne Holland's house was scheduled to be torn down. Because not very many people knew the story and they thought it just looked like a piece of junk, it was scheduled to be torn down by a developer and the land was sold. But after Finding Patience, when people learned the story behind it, they rallied around together. The town council and community members came together and were determined to save it. They bought the land back from the developer, and now Marianne Holland's house is in the process of being preserved. And it will stand as a symbol of humanity in Holly Springs. Thank you. So, why local stages? Here's a picture from Finding Patience again. So, theater has been considered periodically on its deathbed for the past 100 years, between inventions of the cinema and TV and the internet. But theater has always been able to pull itself up back by its bootstraps because it has adapted. But live theater is not out of the woods, nor will it ever be unless it continues to evolve. I'm sad to admit how many times I have gone to a quality theater production and the audience has been less than half full. It's a sad thing to see. But in this digital age, we need to be able to give people something they just can't find by clicking their remote at home. It is cheaper and easier just to stay home and turn on a red box movie or watch Netflix than it is to invest in an evening of theater. That's why we need to give audiences something they can't find anywhere else. Local history theater provides that. It provides a unique, unforgettable experience that can only be found there. Also, local history theater appeals to not just the artistic crowd, which I love that crowd, but it appeals to more than just the artistic crowd or groups that are advocating for one thing or the other. It appeals to the entire community because it's about the community. And every town, every city has a space, a performance space to use. There are churches, there are schools, there are old homes, historical landmarks, local theaters, and of course, outdoor arenas that we can utilize in order to tell these stories. So, finding a venue, finding a place to tell these stories allows people to come together like you are right now, actual people, human beings together in one place, not online, together. It's a rare thing these days, it really is, which leads me to the social benefits of local history theater. So it's no secret that we have a major problem on our hands, a major mental health crisis in our country, well, just in society in general. And a study, an analysis actually, from 2015 went over 70 different studies, and they found that socially isolated people were at a 30% higher risk of dying within the next 7 years. That's significant. It's clear that we need to come together more often, and that will benefit us, our health, emotionally and physically. Finding Patience was like a microcosm of Holly Springs. We saw this diverse cast and crew come together of 100 people or more, and then we watched an entire community unite to see it. It was amazing. As one audience member said, "I feel so very connected to my community since seeing Finding Patience. I've lived in many places in my life and have never really known about those places, their history, blood, sweat, and tears. I find I can't express in words the impact that this show has had upon me." Mary Ackerman. Mary, like thousands of other audience members, felt a connectivity she had never felt before to the place that she lived. She wanted to be a contributor to that place. Kathleen Hebert, the manager of the Holly Springs Cultural Center, said, "I don't think we're done seeing the long-term impacts of the community engagement inspired by Finding Patience. This play made them feel like they belong here now, whether they just moved to town or been here their entire lives." Now, local history theater is not just about warm, fuzzy feelings, as much as I love those feelings, but it also makes sense financially. When you have a play that is about local history, then the target market is the entire city, and even outside of that city. It really just grows the amount of people who would be interested in what you're performing. Finding Patience sold 2,000 tickets and grossed $36,000 with a very low budget, as you can see. Now, if you know anything about community theater, that is a big number. For an unknown theater production to gross $36,000 on its first run is a huge deal. There is clearly a market for this. And when you have a quality theater production, it will sell out, people will come, and they'll be wanting some more. Also, local history theater helps to create and reinforce an identity within a town and within a place. Consider The Lost Colony in Manteo, North Carolina, and also Horn in the West in Boone. These plays show these stories that people connect with these towns. When they think about these towns, they think about the stories within these shows. They're frequently sold out. Tourists schedule their entire vacations around these plays. And a town's identity is solidified in the process. Which brings me to place identity. When a place has an identity, something that is just them, like Finding Patience was for us, people want to visit there. People want to shop there, they want to eat there, they want to stay there. And there's nothing that can take that place of that identity. If we can help reinforce that identity, there will be benefits financially. So, why local talent? How many of you have ever worked backstage on a play? Keep your hands up. Hands up. Worked backstage, lights, sound, costumes, props. Anything? Okay, pretty good. Keep them up, keep them up. Okay, how many of you have ever acted in a play? Nice. Okay, how many of you have ever directed a play? Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up if you've held it up. Okay, how many of you have ever been interested in history? And how many writers are there in the audience? Raise your hand. What about marketing people? Graphic design people? Okay, keep your hands up if you've raised them once. Okay, how many of you have ever actually been an audience member in a theater production? Thank you. Thank you. Look at all those hands. Okay, thank you. So we see that with all the people in this room, we could put on a local history theater production right now. We have about 1 minute and 30 seconds. You guys ready? Just kidding. So my point is that you can do this in any town, any place. There's talent who is just waiting to be utilized, who are looking for a project that they actually want to dedicate their time to. And there are people who are looking for new opportunities to develop talent. Every community has the talent for this. Here are some of our people doing some prop work backstage. Okay, so how will it transform your community? We've already talked about a lot of things today, but in my opinion, the biggest transformation that can occur in your community is a collective change of heart. A desire to not only be in the community, but to be part of the community. A desire to not only read the story, but to be contributors to it. It's a feeling of gratitude for those who have gone before us, and a desire to leave our own pages of history in the story and pass it on to the next generation. Who came before us? Who were the fearless leaders, the innovative geniuses, and the stubborn idealists that helped pave the way for us in our cities, states, and nation? It's time to tell their tales. Local history theater provides the way so that we can look in the beginning, understand the beginning, help right the wrongs, and then we can enjoy and make the most of the present and help write our futures. Thank you.